My name's Matt Piper and I'm the curator at the Haynes International Motor Museum. That role basically means that I am the subject matter expert here relating to our collection. Our collection is not only just cars and motorcycles, but covers a lot of other things as well. In fact, thousands of different objects relating to motoring and motoring history. Artwork, enamel signs, posters, petrol cans, ration books, you name it. If it relates to motoring, we have it. My passion for cars started when I was a child, probably no surprises there. I couldn't actually tell you when it began. All I know is that I've always been interested in cars. I would say that there are two aspects to my job. One is looking after the collection, certainly working with the vehicles and the other things that we collect. But I always say that the vehicles in our collection only tells half the story. It's the people who visit the museum and that I speak with that make up the other 50% of it. So I very much enjoy dealing with people as well, and teaching, of course, because we have schools that visit our education facility too. The hall that we're in is the American Dream. Now, when the museum opened in 1985, this was the only hall that we had. This is the hall that housed the entire collection. If you were to ask me to show you my office, I would say look around you. Yep, I have a desk and a computer upstairs. This is my office. This is where all of my work really takes place. And what a wonderful office to have, containing cars like a 1931 Cadillac V16 Madam X, or a 1915 Model T Ford as well. The museum was founded by a gentleman called John Haynes in 1985. John started Haynes Publishing, the Haynes Publishing Group. John became very successful in business and ever more enthusiastic about motoring and also collecting his own vehicles. There came a time in the 1980s where John began to forget where parts of his collection were, because he had about 29 cars. And someone suggested to him that it might be a good idea to collect them all together, so he knew where they were, but also why not open the doors to the public? You could actually charge people to come in to see them, and at the same time form a charitable trust to hold the vehicles to make sure that their future is absolutely ring-fenced and secure. So the Haynes International Motor Museum has always been a charitable trust and an educational trust as well, which is here to preserve motoring and motoring history. This is part of the Haynes International Motor Museum's collection that you don't see very often, but it is still very much part of the collection. We have in our archive books, magazines, catalogues, leaflets, repair manuals from the dawn of motoring to present day. And for example, for £1 every Wednesday, you could buy the Motor magazine. This is a 1952 edition, and flicking through it, I see that some things don't change. There's a chap here who has a moustache rather like mine. Very roughly speaking, we have around 400 vehicles in our collection, so cars, motorcycles and one or two things in between. We need to actually think about the way we interpret our collection, the way we explain it to people. And so you'll find in all the different halls that we have around the museum, each one has a name. The one that we're sitting in now is called the American Dream. Halls refer to motorsport, other particular types of cars like micro and mini cars. We also have a lineup of cars called Wheels Around the World. So really, it's possible to interpret a collection in any way, because there's always an angle that you can take or get from a vehicle, an historic angle, a social angle, a manufacturing angle. So it's almost endless as to the possibilities of the way you can interpret a collection like ours. We have to be quite particular about what we collect, and we have certain cars that we are on the lookout for. We haven't added to our collection for a little while. Space for any museum is always going to be an issue. Volunteers have to be mentioned in the context of our museum and most museums as well, because we have a volunteer force that is about 80 strong, which is about the same number as paid staff that we have. They are here because they are passionate about motoring as well. How are you doing today, chaps? You all well? Good, excellent. Now, we need to have a look at these cars under our conservation programme. I don't know whether you are aware, but the 250 GT has recently been out of the collection. They are generous enough to give up their free time, in some cases a couple of days a week. They help us conserve the collection. They talk to visitors. They help with anything we do, education, perhaps building displays, running the cars. You name it, our volunteer staff is there to help us with all of that.
The reason I love it is I've had a lifetime love affair with motor cars, and when I retired I thought it would be great to be able to come and look after the cars in this collection. What do? We clean them, we look after the interiors, and also occasionally I go on the information desk at the front of the reception and give people general information of what goes on here.
It's very interesting because you meet people from all over the world. You get people from far and wide who are interested in cars, in particular British cars, and it's just a nice environment to work in.
It's amazing. It's the beauty of the motor cars, the craftsmanship, the engineering that's gone into them. I just love every aspect of it.
I think we need to start with this car. Could you kindly have a look over the car, just as we always do with each of our cars that we're looking at in particular? Just check for any damage, have a look around the car, at the display, the explainer, to make sure everything's correct. But today in particular, for this car and the other Ferraris, I think we need to have a look at the leather in the cars. All of these cars have leather. We need to have a look at the condition to make sure or to find out whether or not the leather needs any particular conditioning. Many thanks indeed. Thanks, chaps. Have you ever heard an expression, wow, that's a doozy? Well, this is the car, or the type of car, that actually coined that expression. This is a 1931 Model J Duesenberg, and it is a very special car indeed. Only 8 of this particular type of Model J were made out of about 490 odd. We're very pleased that this car is in our collection. It's a very special car to us. The car runs. We had this car running in 2016. These cars were the playthings of the rich and famous. The kind of person that could afford, in fact the only kind of person that could afford a car like this would be a film star, like Clark Gable for example. Duesenberg, they were quite clever about the way they used film stars. If you see a picture of a film star with a Duesenberg, it's not always the case that the film star used to own this car. That's a good example of product placement where Duesenberg might have thought it was a good idea to have some shots of a film star driving a car like this. These were impressive pieces of kit in the 1920s and 1930s. This is a straight 8-cylinder, twin overhead camshaft engine with 4 valves per cylinder, good for about 120 miles an hour. But if you have a supercharged version, the SJ version, you could be looking to push speeds of in excess of 130 miles an hour. Now, the interesting thing about this car is that we know who the first owner was. It's a lady called Dorothy Elmshurst. That is her second married name. Her family name was Payne Whitney. I have only just recently found out, and this is quite a bizarre discovery, but something that makes my job absolutely fascinating, is that Dorothy is actually buried about 80 miles away from where we are standing here in Somerset. She used to live in Somerset, and in fact when she bought this car in 1931 she was living in Great Britain. So I'm actually going through the process now of trying to find out a bit more about her acquiring the car, why she didn't actually keep the car in the United Kingdom, and when she decided to dispose of the car. These are the kind of things that help us interpret the cars that we have in our collection, and this is just the kind of information that I like to share with our visitors. So we have in this room two displays for the price of one. We have Great British marks and also custom and bespoke. Now I'm surrounded by very traditional British motor cars. But over here we have our custom and bespoke cars. Now these, as their names suggest, are the cars that are not traditional. These are cars really that could be anything their owners and creators wanted them to be. But the interesting thing is they do still have a reference to the traditional, because we have a couple of cars here like the Cougar, for example, that is running a straight 6 Jaguar XK engine, and the hot rod next to it is running a V12 Jaguar engine. So things are not always what they seem in our collection. Believe it or not, this Morris Minor van used to be a post office van. It couldn't be more different now. Almost every part of this van has been painted in some way or another. If you have a look underneath the bonnet, every aspect of the engine, all of its top end, and in fact its bottom end has been painted. And if you follow the car underneath, even its drivetrain, its prop shaft has also been painted. Let me introduce you to our Supercar Century display, crammed full of very desirable motor cars. Just to name but a few, we have the iconic Series 3 E-Type, of course renowned for its 5.3 litre V12 engine, very smooth, if not out and out fast, about 150 miles an hour. I will say that this is one of my favourites, absolutely beautiful. Porsche 911 RS Carrera. Behind it, same colour, De Tomaso Pantera. Pantera is Italian for panther. And hidden away behind it is another gem, a replica. We have no problem saying to visitors that we have replicas in our collection. This is a very good replica, I hasten to add. This is a Ford GT40. This is the road-going version of the car that was designed by Ford to beat Ferrari at Le Mans, and beat Ferrari it did. This has to be one of the most popular cars, certainly one of the most popular supercars that we have in our collection, the Lamborghini Countach. Beauty, I would say, is in the eye of the beholder. I would say that even decades after this car was first released, its styling is still very controversial. Beautiful to look at, perhaps, but very uncomfortable to drive. This is our Wheels Around the World lineup here, including a 1959 Gaz Chayika. This was an executive's car, a diplomat's car of its time. What's interesting though is that it is based almost entirely on the American Packard car, which I always think is quite interesting, bearing in mind that the Cold War was very frosty at the time, and so you have the Soviet Union basically copying an American car. Moving on to India, we have a Morris Oxford, or rather the Indian version of it, the Hindustan Ambassador. The British Motor Corporation, when it stopped making that particular car, gave the tooling to an Indian concern which continued to make it, and actually became one of, if not the most popular cars to be seen on Indian roads, and has only gone out of production in recent years. We are a charity. Importantly, we are an independent charity. In other words, we are self-funding, which is really quite remarkable when you think that we're one of the largest motor museums in the country. We have a number of commercial ventures, like a lot of other museums, that help support us. For example, we have a cafe, we have a shop. We have a commercial garage as well, where the public can come and have their cars serviced, or even a full restoration as well. So we're a very busy organisation, and our aims are charitable and educational, but we are a business as well, and we are always busy. We have a relatively small staff number. My direct report is the collections director, Darren Hammond, and his role is to obviously oversee what I do, but with the other directors of the business, he has a very kind of global vision of the collection with regard to the way we conserve and preserve our exhibits, and also considering adding to them as well.
I've worked in museums for 30 years, mainly in the military aviation area, but I've always been a car fanatic, particularly American muscle cars. So working here is the perfect combination of expertise with a hobby, really. We have an extensive program which is still in the development phases, to be honest. Every vehicle will have its own documentation which represents its conservation history. And so every time it's looked at by our volunteers, that work is signed off, and then those jobs are looked at as to whether they are urgent tasks that need immediate attention, or whether they can be deferred to a later date, which will see every one of our, I believe, 293 displayed vehicles and associated objects looked at by our volunteers once every 4 weeks. It's a big task. It's a bit like painting the Forth Road Bridge. Once you've finished, you go right back to the beginning and start all over again. And we still don't know if that 4-week cycle is going to be often enough. We might go back to the week 1 items in week 4 and find that, you know, they're not looking at their best, and we need to crunch it down into 3 weeks. So it's a big task, but we're very lucky to have a large group of volunteers to help us with that kind of work. The Restoration Centre is separate from what we do in collections. They do have their own group of volunteers as opposed to collections-based volunteers. Brad has his own full-time team of mechanics, but the volunteers work alongside those, picking up smaller tasks.
Here we are now in the museum's workshop and restoration centre, and I'd like to introduce you to my colleague Bradley Morger. Bradley is the manager of this part of the museum's concern. Brad, the car that we're standing next to now is the collection's Jaguar XJ220.
That's right.
We've asked you to do some work on it. Could you just remind me what it is you're looking at with the car in the air at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment we're doing the major service. It's done every 8 years on these, and that requires also replacing the fuel tank. So it's a bag tank on these, and they deteriorate over time.
And that's the same as Formula One racing?
Very similar, yeah, that's right. And you also use an aircraft as well. While we're doing the fuel tank, we also replace the clutch and cam belts. The clutch is made of an organic material, so it breaks down over time, so it should be done every 2 years. So yeah, a fairly major job, as you can see. We've got the gearbox out at the moment.
The museum, certainly in the 7 years that I've been here, has changed constantly, and that's actually quite surprising for a museum environment. The museum has always grown. Bearing in mind that we first started with around 29 cars, well, we have added to that by something in the region of 300, which is a huge amount of progress to make in a relatively short period of time. And what that has meant is that our site has had to change, because physically we've needed to house the collection as it's grown. And that has led us to 2014, when we unveiled a redeveloped museum, the museum that you see today in 2017, with its new facade and upgraded visitor facilities, and I'm very pleased to say also enhanced collection exhibition facilities as well. I've never known a time when there hasn't been something going on here. And what I would say, in a rather cloak and dagger way, is that people should watch this space, literally, because there are plans for the future that I'm not going to reveal now. We are always changing, we are always looking at ways to enhance the visitor experience, obviously bearing in mind the preservation of the collection and to expand the collection as well. So do keep an eye on us, look at our website and follow us and see what happens. Diamond in brief. Right, I'm going to start again. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to, sorry.
Lovely. And action.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Darren Hammond, who is our collections director. Diamond in brief. Right, I'm going to start again.
Okay.
Right, so workshop and restorations. Right, sorry, forgive me. I just need to, forgive me.
Yeah, apologies. That's the office phones. I can't do anything about those.
But there's one car in particular that I'd like to show you, which is this one. It's a Rover 2000. It's generally.
Yeah,
what if I go from there? There's one car.
Yeah,
did you mind me doing that? There's one car.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Because
there's one.
I'm walking. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah.
Whatever the
Okay. Just yeah, that's fine. Spend my life going backwards anyway.